king of MAGA comedy. His rise to prominence is neither a trickle of fortuity nor a meandering arc of slapstick providence. Nay, it is the direct, causative repercussion of leftist orthodoxy transmogrifying humor into a sacrilegious act of modern blasphemy.
It's an Asian guy, a black guy, a Latino, and a trans woman, all making the most raunchy, like insanely jokes to each other. I also mentioned that, like Shane Gillis, I've listened to his podcast, and he says he's a Trump enjoyer, right? But he's not a Trump supporter, and he has bits too about how, like, as he gets older, he's becoming more Republican and whatever. But like at his heart, he's pretty liberal. But it sucks to see that he has no space on the left to make those kinds of jokes and to like be based.
Yeah. So let me restate what you're saying less inflammatorily. In a less inflammatory manner. Okay, I agree with what you're saying. Actually, I don't think Cake has posted these yet because I haven't given him to post yet. But like part of the community guideline stuff that I'm working on getting up on the site is like I generally don't have rules against like say or like slurs or racist jokes or edgy jokes or whatever. What the focus should be on is like bigotry, right? I think one of the big issues. It's funny because we talked about this. Like I say we, as in like the gaming community. The gaming community talked about this, and the internet, you know, at large, like 8 to 10 years ago, especially during the Gamergate era, that one of the big problems that people had was this hyperfixation on like language, like the words themselves, and not actually looking at any of the things being conveyed. And it ends up in this like ultra cringy world where people are going to assume that what you're saying is like, or just because of like a word you use or a joke that you say. And I mean, that is a perspective that you can have, but nobody in the real world functions that way. Like nobody in the real world operates that way, and the only people that operate that way are young white progressives. And so you wind up in this weird cringe world where you've got these young white people who are thinking they're like saving like the Hispanic people with the word like Latinx or Latina or whatever and you're, you know, getting rid of all these race jokes because the only people who are racist are white people, right? Black people would never be racist. Latinos or Hispanic people or Asian, nobody else is racist, just white people. So that weird crusade, I think, kind of permeated through a lot of the party, and it destroyed people's abilities to just evaluate like what is a joke, right? And there's one thing that I spoke about before that's really difficult for people to do is people can't have like second order conversations where you don't actually have, I wish I could remember the example that this would come up a lot before. You don't actually have an issue with like one level of the thing. You have an issue with like the second level of a thing, but you misidentify it. So for instance, we can talk about me platforming Fuentes, right? If somebody wants to argue Destiny platforming Nick Fuentes is bad because he shouldn't have access to this audience or whatever, that's fine. But that's fundamentally a different argument than Destiny is a that's why he platformed Nick Fuentes. And people on the left just destroy that. Hassan, not to make it personal, but Hassan does that with me right now, right? Where Hassan's like, oh, Destiny is actually anti-Semitic because, and then he points to like an anti-joke that I made in chat. But like, everybody around me knows I'm not an anti-Semitic person. How could I be when Israel pays me so much money to defend the Mossad? You know, no, but like it's obvious that there's not like a real anti-Semitic like feeling. Yeah. So people going back to the stuff that you were saying. Yeah, people need to focus way more on and less on just like edgy jokes because God, it's so cringe. And everybody's pointed this out. ContraPoint's pointed out with trans people. Obviously, I've pointed out a million times. Yeah, it's so cringe, that hyperfixation on just like an edgy joke. It's like Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Also, sorry, I was just winded. I just came back from running and I knew I had to talk about this. But
like, do you like for example, or were you just like running home?
No, I was running around the block and I was listening to you talk, and I was like, I have a lot of thoughts on this topic specifically, so I wanted to talk about it.
Do you jog in place at stoplights?
No, I just run around the block. Oh. I like go in a circle.
Okay. All
right. But a couple more things. Like, have you heard of Stavros? He's a comedian as well, kind of in the space.
Yes. He came from Company, right? But he doesn't talk about it anymore.
I think so. Yeah. If he had a discussion that he had with Theo Von recently, and he talks to Theo Von about why he thinks Trump is going to be bad in general. And you can hear Theo Von, you can just see that he's very captured. Like, Theo Von is a very reasonable guy. He had Bernie Sanders on, and he listens to Stavros, and then he brings up the classic Russia talking points that are beamed directly into everyone's brains. But since there's no place for someone like Theo Von to perform comedy, and Shane Gillis and all them, they just have no choice but to be captured by the whole Joe Rogan sphere.
Yeah,
And
because
I
when
think,
you sit in like a certain environment, and people will pretend that they're resistant to this, or they'll pretend it doesn't happen, but everybody knows it happens. People, if you sit in a certain environment where you hear a thing said over and over again, you're going to start to believe it after a while. Like that's normal, like human nature for 99% of humanity. So if there's absolutely no place for you on the left because they're too woke or they can't handle any edgy humor or anything at all, and then all you do is spend time on the right, like joking with people, yeah, you're going to pick up these. First, there'll be jokes and memes, and then they'll be like a little bit more serious. And then before you know it, these people are like not their kids because they're genuinely scared of, the health implications.
right. Yeah, I guess it just comes back down to like just absolutely kicking out of the progressive people from the party that are, woke scolding and everything, because they're the ones holding us back and not letting us. Because I'm really liberal. I had a gay roommate last year, and we would make he was a gay black guy. And we would constantly make jokes about each other. And I'm Latino, so younger people my age, and especially white people who listen to these comedy podcasts and everything, they get sucked into that culture sphere. And I think comedy is a huge root, like all that culture capture that the Republicans have been able to do, like stem from that comedy sphere. And you talked about Jon Stewart, and he's a good example. But like you mentioned a couple of days ago, he came from politics and then became a comedian or something like that, right? He's a political commentator first. So we need more like comedians like Stavros and maybe Shane Gillis if he can be released from the Joe Rogan stranglehold.
Yeah, I mean I don't disagree, but it's just people need to be very careful on the left when they talk about this and when they do this. Like getting these people over into our camp has to be like a byproduct of behavior, not like a we've got to get these guys over to over to our camp. Like it can't be that. You just have to create spaces where people feel like more safe, like being in those spaces. Does that make sense?
The point would just be like to stop the whole woke scolding thing, and that allows that environment for the edgy jokes to like prosper. I guess you were ahead of the time in 2016 with your whole N-word manifesto. It just comes back to that. But,
sure. To be clear, I wasn't. Yeah. It was not a manifesto on saying the N-word, but
I know.
Forsooth, the cerebral left, ensnared in its ultra-crepidarian fixation on lexicographical rectitude, has fashioned a culture where laughter must first kneel at the altar of ideological puritanism, only then to be excommunicated for failing its esoteric catechism. Let me elucidate. The woke-tariat's fixation on linguistic flagellation has birthed an epistemological conundrum where comedy itself is pathologized. Those who once walked the fertile plains of comedic liberation, where punches were thrown in all directions, sparing no identity, creed, or flag, now stand banished, condemned as agents of opprobrious incivility. In such scorched conditions, the Gillises and Vaughns of the world, men irreverent yet innocuous at heart, are cast as jesting vagabonds with no refuge save the laissez-faire circus tent of the American right. The sin of Shane Gillis, his proverbial casus belli, was his cardinal refusal to let his humor be chained by the grand inquisitors of progressive sanctimony. For those gripped by the shackles of moralistic rigidity, the mere utterance of a phrase too spicy, a joke too jagged, becomes a teleological condemnation of one's entire being. Ecce homo. The left has erected a simulacrum where jokes are passed like scripture, where second-order analysis is incinerated in favor of superficial outrage. The Inquisition thus rolls on with scorched fervor, blacklisting jesters and forcing them into the maw of populist counterculture. Behold the paradox. Gillis and his ilk are not archangels of conservatism, nor heralds of red-capped orthodoxy. They are neither propagandists nor polemicists in the MAGA legions. Shane Gillis, by his own admission, identifies as a liberal at his marrow. Yet as he drifts inexorably toward the rightward margins of the cultural dialectic, it becomes evident that the choice is not his own. He is simply fleeing a left that has forsaken him. For what man desires to tiptoe on ideological eggshells for the simple indulgence of jest? Comedy is, after all, a protean creature that thrives on irreverence. It cannot, nay, must not be reduced to a sterile doctrinaire discourse wherein humor is pre-approved by committee. And thus, the left has committed its most egregious lapsus. In its inability to distinguish linguistic incivility from substantive bigotry, it has conflated the trivial and the severe. The woke junta, ever vigilant for the linguistic heresies of podcasters, comedians, and digital jesters, dissects their jests like microcosmic conspiracies of societal corruption. A word, a phrase, an edgelord dalliance becomes sufficient to summon the digital guillotine of cancellation. Yet in wielding such a blunt cudgel, they smite not bigotry, but its most ardent adversary, satire. For satire, with all its prickly thorns and transgressive roots, is the tool that disarms societal hypocrisies. To neuter it is to surrender wit and irony to the banal orthodoxy of finger-wagging sermonizers. Consider the likes of Hasanabi, paragon of leftist verbiage, but symptom of the left's failings. While his diatribes launch missiles at comedy's edgelords, the resultant cultural vacuum is filled, not by progressive jesters, but by those willing to wield humor as a weapon against wokeness. The Shane Gillises, Stavros Halkiases, and Theo Vaughns, men baptized in the scalding rivers of comedic controversy, find themselves unconsciously welcomed into the populist fold. For there, amid the Joe Rogan ecosphere of intellectual contrarianism, they find sanctuary to breathe, to jest, to offend, without the clangorous howling of woke tribunals gnashing at their heels. Ironically, the left's cultural disavowal of edgy humor echoes its political missteps. By isolating swaths of potential allies, be they comedians, podcasters, or reverent contrarians, the movement alienates the very voices capable of swaying public sentiment through charm and humor. Hearken! Jon Stewart, the oracle of liberal satire, rose to prominence not through sanctimonious browbeating, but by transmuting leftist ideas into palatable comedic wisdom. His successors are not welcomed on MSNBC, but ostracized for the grievous sin of transgressive humor. And in their exile, they drift into the arms of a right gleeful to claim them as ideological converts. It is within this vacuum that MAGA culture thrives. For the comedic sphere, bereft of liberal irreverence, now serves as the citadel of cultural capture. The right, though oft criticized for its authoritarian inclinations, has ingeniously co-opted humor as a populist tool. Comedy, once the vanguard of leftist defiance, now becomes the arsenal of conservatism, weaponized to ridicule the excesses of progressive orthodoxy. The irony is bitter but poetic. In silencing edgy comedians, the left surrenders its most potent rhetorical weapon to its opponents. The Gillises and Vaughns do not preach from altars of ideology. They jest from stools of unfiltered humanity. Their humor reflects the fractious, impolite truths of lived experience. They mock everyone, themselves included. To perceive this as malice is to conflate logos with pathos, to mistake irreverence for bigotry. Yet this misapprehension runs rampant on the modern left, where humor is rationibus cruciatus, crucified on the logic of superficial analysis. For the youth, humor is not merely entertainment, it is cultural currency. In the great war of cultural memes, sound bites, and viral clips, the left cannot afford to stand as dour sentinels of ideological purity. The battlefield favors those willing to jest boldly, to laugh robustly, and to tolerate the uncomfortable edges of satire. The Republicans understand this intuitively, embracing comedians who roast both their idols and adversaries. Meanwhile, the left, paralyzed by self-inflicted pieties, watches its cultural influence slip inexorably away. To reclaim this ground, progressives must extinguish the torches of their linguistic witch hunts. The cancellari of Twitter must stand down. The tribunals of moral chastity must dissolve. Leftist spaces must become, as they once were, sanctuaries for raw, unfiltered humor. For comedy, when liberated from dogma, becomes a unifying force, a salve for division, a mirror for absurdity, a bridge between ideologies. If the left fails to heed this counsel, the future shall be Shane Gillis' comedy tent, Joe Rogan's podcasting den, and Theo Vaughn's bantering perch. And they will laugh. They will laugh heartily as progressives scowl, bewildered, clutching their unread treatises on moral purity. For laughter, my friends, is neither red nor blue. It is simply human. And the tribe that laughs loudest will always claim the cultural throne.